The mirror in the powder room of the D'Arcy estate showed a woman I had not seen in 7 years. Emerald silk-hugged shoulders I had spent a lifetime hiding beneath cardigans and shapeless blazers. My auburn hair, always twisted into a severe knot, now fell in loose waves against my collarbone. I was 32 years old, and for the first time since my divorce from Stefan D'Arcy, I had chosen to look like myself instead of a ghost of somebody's ex-wife. The gala waited on the other side of the door. So did every relative who had spent years pretending I did not exist. My hand hovered on the brass handle. Tonight I would either become invisible again or refuse to disappear ever again. I opened the door. The ballroom fell into a strange, layered hush the moment I stepped onto the marble. It was not silence exactly, more a dropping of tone, as if the string quartet had lowered by half a step and the champagne glasses had all been set down at once. Heads turned. Helena D'Arcy, my former mother-in-law, paused mid-sentence with her hand at her pearls. Nadia, the stepsister who used to introduce me as Stefan's little project, tilted her head like a bird studying something unfamiliar. Victor, the cousin who always spoke over me, actually stopped speaking, and at the far end of the room, near the tall windows, Nikolai D'Arcy set down his glass. I had known Nikolai for 11 years. Ever since Stefan first brought me home to the winter house in the mountains, and Nikolai had shaken my hand with the careful gravity of a man who did not shake hands often. 49 now, silver threading his dark hair at the temples, he had always been the quiet center of every room he entered. Head of the family. Head of the empire. The man everyone called boss when they thought no one was listening. He did not smile when he saw me. He simply looked, the way a man looks at a piece of evidence he had not expected to encounter. Then he crossed the ballroom, slower than a man in a hurry, faster than a man with nothing to say. Guests parted for him without seeming to notice they had. Celia. His voice was low, meant only for me. You came. You invited me, I said. I decided to actually show up this year. His eyes moved once, quickly, over my dress, and then away again, as if he had corrected himself in the middle of a thought. Walk with me a moment. I followed him past the champagne fountain, past the string quartet, into the alcove near the library doors. He stopped and turned. He was close enough that I could see the small scar on his jawline, the one Stefan had once told me came from a business meeting that went sideways in Marseille when Nikolai was 22, close enough that I could smell the faint cedar of his cologne and the older, colder smell of the sea salt on the terrace he must have crossed to greet an arriving guest. You're not leaving like that, he said quietly. I felt heat climb my throat. Excuse me? Not the dress. He shook his head once. The dress is remarkable. That's the problem. Half the people in that room haven't seen you in years. The other half never bothered to look. Tonight both groups are looking, and not all of them are kind. Helena has been talking to Victor for the past 20 minutes. Nadia already made 2 phone calls. I don't want you walking to a car alone in this district tonight. I stared at him. You think I'm in danger from your relatives? I think, he said, you own something they've been trying to erase, and they just remembered you exist. The words landed strangely. I had not thought about the boutique hospitality company Stefan and I built in years. Not really. Marlowe D'Arcy Hospitality had been my idea back when I was 24, and Stefan was 29, and we still believed we were building a life. I had put my savings, my design work, my supplier relationships, my everything into it. I had chosen the tile in the first lobby myself. I had sat cross-legged on hotel floors at midnight with a swatch book across my knees, arguing with contractors about grout lines while Stefan slept upstairs in a suite that would eventually bear my name over the door. When the marriage collapsed, I had signed away almost all of it, exhausted, wanting only to leave. Almost all. Not all. 12% had stayed in my name because my lawyer had insisted, and I had been too tired to argue. Nikolai, I said carefully, what have you found? Not here. His gaze flicked across the ballroom. Not tonight. Come to the office tomorrow. 10. Use the private entrance. Stefan appeared over his shoulder then, 38 now, still handsome in the untroubled way that had first drawn me to him, and later warned me away. He carried 2 glasses of champagne, and the same rehearsed smile he had worn through the last year of our marriage. Celia, you look different. I look the same, I said. You're just used to me looking smaller. Helena floated in behind him, powder pink chiffon and iron underneath. Celia, darling, what a surprise. We had you down as a maybe. You had me down as a no, I corrected gently. Nikolai's shoulders shifted a fraction, a movement so slight only someone who had studied him for a decade would notice. Helena caught it too. Her smile thinned. Nikolai, dear, do bring Celia over to say hello to the Marcellus. They've been asking after her. It was not a request. It was a redirection, an attempt to place me back inside a room she controlled. Celia and I were speaking, Nikolai said. We'll join you shortly. Helena's chin lifted a millimeter, and she withdrew. Stefan hovered another awkward moment, then followed her. When they were gone, Nikolai exhaled once through his nose, the closest thing to relief I had ever seen him allow himself in public. 10 o'clock, he repeated. Private entrance. Bring anything you still have from the company, emails, contracts, bank statements, anything Stefan let you keep. He didn't let me keep anything. Then bring what you took anyway. A small, dry lift at one corner of his mouth. I know you, Celia. You are not a woman who throws away receipts. I drove home that night with my knuckles pale on the steering wheel, and the emerald dress whispering against the leather seat. The street slid past in yellow smears, and I found myself replaying the exact cadence of the sentence he had said in the alcove. You own something they've been trying to erase. Not you own something they want. Something they have been actively, patiently, unwrappingly trying to erase. I did not feel invisible anymore. I felt the exact opposite, and I was not yet sure whether that was freedom or exposure. The D'Arcy corporate tower rose 42 floors above the harbor, a spine of dark glass with the family crest etched discreetly above the private elevator. I arrived at 9:52 with a leather satchel over one shoulder and a linen blazer buttoned over a plain ivory shell. Yesterday's emerald had been a statement. Today's clothes were a working uniform. I had learned long ago that women who wanted to be listened to had to dress like nobody was listening. Nikolai's office occupied the top floor, floor-to-ceiling glass on 3 sides, a long walnut desk, and 2 leather chairs arranged not across from the desk but beside it. He rose when I entered, took my coat himself, and gestured to the chair on his right, not the one facing him. Sit beside me, he said. We're going to read the same documents. It'll be easier. For the next 4 hours we worked in near silence, broken only by his occasional question and my occasional answer. He had assembled 7 years of Marlowe and D'Arcy Hospitality's filings, shareholder registers, board minutes, dividend distributions, transfer records. My 12%, on paper, had been slowly diluted through 3 separate share issuances I had never been notified of, each one legal in isolation, each one framed as necessary capital raises approved by the board. By last quarter, Nikolai said quietly, your 12% is functionally 3. Who authorized the issuances? Board resolutions, signed by Stefan as chairman. Countersigned by Victor as company secretary. Helena is listed as a non-executive advisor. He turned a page. Every dilution round was subscribed by a holding vehicle called Ardent Pines. Ardent Pines is owned by a trust. The trust is administered by Helena. I sat back. The city outside the glass looked very far away, and my own reflection in it looked closer than the buildings. Nikolai, I said, why are you showing me this? He set the page down carefully, because I only found it 3 weeks ago, when I began reviewing all family-adjacent entities ahead of the succession restructure. And because when I found it, my first thought was not, this is a business problem. My first thought was, they did this to Celia. That's a personal thought. Yes. He did not look away. It is. I sat with that for a long moment. Nikolai had never been demonstrative. In 11 years, I could count on one hand the times he had spoken to me at length without Stefan or Helena in the room. He had always been kind, in the reserved way of men who guard their kindness so it is not stolen. But this was something else. This was a man saying quietly, I noticed you. What do you want me to do? I asked. I want you to help me investigate. You know the company from inside. You know the suppliers, the brand identity, the operational rhythm. I know the family. Between us, we can trace exactly what they did, when, and with what intent. And then we decide, together, what happens next. Together. I tested the word. Not you deciding and telling me afterward. Together, he repeated. Celia, I am not offering to rescue you. I don't insult women I respect. We began the next morning. Nikolai cleared a small conference room on the 38th floor for our exclusive use, with 2 workstations, a secure server, and a coffee machine that took itself very seriously. For 2 weeks we built a shadow ledger of everything Marlowe and D'Arcy Hospitality had done, cross-referencing invoices against bank movements, tracing supplier relationships I had personally established to see which had been quietly reassigned to Ardent Pines subsidiaries. I began to recognize my own signature in the margins of documents I had never been shown before, forged with a delicacy that would have been almost flattering if it had not been so violating. The pattern was elegant, patient, and cruel. Every high-margin contract I had originally negotiated had been renewed through a shell entity. Every low-margin obligation had stayed inside the company whose shares I owned. My 3% slice was a slice of a hollowed loaf. They didn't just dilute your ownership, I said one evening, staring at a projected spreadsheet. They rerouted the profitable arteries into a separate body. My shares are in the corpse. Nikolai was silent for a moment. Then, yes, that is exactly what they did. How long have they been doing it? Since about 8 months after your divorce. Once they were certain you would not come back. Something inside me went very quiet. Not angry, not yet. Just quiet in the way water goes quiet before it freezes. I remembered the 8th month after my divorce clearly. I had been in a small rented apartment near the botanical gardens, sleeping 10 hours a night, teaching myself to cook single portions. I had thought I was healing. I had not known I was also being erased. Nikolai must have seen something cross my face, because he closed the folder in front of him and rested his hands on it, palms down, as if steadying the table itself. Celia, take the rest of the afternoon. Walk somewhere. This will still be here tomorrow. So will they. Yes, but they don't get to also have your night. I looked at him for a long moment. Nobody in my life had ever said anything quite like that to me. Stefan, in 7 years of marriage, had never once suggested there was a piece of my evening that belonged to me and not to the family calendar. My own mother, gentle as she had been, had raised me to believe that a woman's time was the last commons, the last piece of land anyone could freely walk across. I nodded, because I did not trust my voice, and I picked up my coat, and I left the building before I could say anything that would make either of us uncomfortable. I walked along the harbor for 2 hours. The gulls wheeled and complained above the fishing boats, and a small girl in a yellow coat ran ahead of her father chasing pigeons that were much too quick for her, and I remembered, with a small sharp ache, that I had once been a woman who noticed such things without effort. Somewhere in the last 6 years I had stopped noticing. I had trained myself, without meaning to, into a kind of low-grade blindness, an efficiency of not seeing that had let me walk through days without being cut by them. It had also, I realize now, let me walk through years without being touched by them either. When I came back at 7, Nikolai was still in the conference room, jacket off, sleeves rolled, working through a stack I had not yet touched. He did not comment on my return. He simply slid a fresh coffee across the table and turned the next page. It was, in its way, the kindest thing anyone had done for me in a long time. He had made no fuss about my absence, and no ceremony about my return. He had simply left the seat next to him warm and waiting. Helena requested a family lunch that Sunday. She always did this when she sensed movement she had not authorized. The dining room at the estate was set for 6. Helena, Nadia, Victor, Stefan, Nikolai, and, for the first time in 4 years, me. My place was at the far end, near the sideboard, the seat traditionally reserved for someone about to be politely dismissed. Nikolai walked in, glanced at the table, and quietly moved my place card to the seat on his immediate right. He did not comment. He did not look at Helena. He simply pulled out the chair and waited for me to sit. Helena's fork paused above her plate. Nikolai, dear, we already arranged the seating. We rearranged it, he said pleasantly. Nadia laughed too brightly. Celia, you must tell us about your little project. Marlowe D'Arcy, is it? I always forget the name. It's the name on the door of 41 boutique hotels, I said. It's not a project. It's a company I built. That Stefan built. Helena corrected gently. That Stefan and I built. And then he stopped building, and I kept going, and then I left. The company kept my name because the brand equity was mine. That was in the settlement. Nadia's mouth opened, then closed. Helena set down her fork with a delicacy that was almost a sound effect. Stefan did not look up from his plate. Victor cleared his throat. He was 43, ruddy-faced, and always slightly out of breath, as if life had been jogging beside him for years, and he was only now noticing. Celia, we don't want to bore Nikolai with old business. Old business is my favorite kind, Nikolai said mildly. It compounds. The rest of the lunch proceeded in careful, glassy politeness. But I noticed that Helena did not touch her wine, that Nadia's laughter had a strained edge, that Victor kept glancing at Stefan, and that Stefan kept glancing at his plate. They knew we knew. They did not yet know how much. When Helena finally rose to signal the end of the meal, she squeezed my shoulder in passing with a warmth that was so precisely wrong I almost laughed. She had, at some point in the last hour, decided to try charm. It was going to be the least effective weapon in her considerable arsenal. The following Tuesday, Victor sent Nikolai a revised proposal for the annual restructuring of family-linked entities. Nikolai forwarded it to me without comment. I opened it in our 38th floor conference room with a cup of coffee going cold at my elbow. Buried in Clause 17, in the language of routine housekeeping, was a share cancellation mechanism that would extinguish any holding below 5% in Marlowe and D'Arcy Hospitality. My 3% would evaporate in a single stroke, converted to a token cash payment based on a valuation Victor's own team had prepared. I read it 3 times. Then I opened the document's revision history. The clause had been inserted at 11:14 the previous night. The author field read Victor D'Arcy. The prior version, sent to Nikolai's assistant only, did not contain the clause. Someone had assumed Nikolai's office would rubber stamp the document without diffing it. I walked into Nikolai's office at 4 that afternoon with a printout, the 2 versions clipped together, the inserted clause highlighted in soft yellow. He tried to bury it, I said. Nikolai read both versions in silence. When he finished, he set them on the desk, aligned the edges precisely with his fingertips, and looked up. Celia, he said, would you like me to handle this, or would you like to? I thought about the answer for a long moment. I would like to be in the room when it is handled. Then be in the room. The meeting was called for Friday morning. Victor arrived expecting a signature. Helena came for moral support she pretended was operational input. Stefan came because he had been told to. Nadia came because she had smelled blood and did not want to miss the tasting. I sat on Nikolai's right. He slid the 2 clipped versions across the table. Victor, he said, explain Clause 17. Victor's face went through 3 colors in 2 seconds. It's, a routine cleanup. Tidying dormant holdings, small parcels below 5% create administrative burden. Celia's 12% was not small, Nikolai said. It was 3% because you and Helena spent 6 years diluting it through Ardent Pines. Now you propose to cancel what remains, in the same document you asked me to sign without discussion. Helena inhaled to speak. Nikolai raised 1 finger and she did not. I have every share issuance from the last 7 years, I said. I have every notification I should have received and did not. I have every supplier contract that was moved out of the company and into an Ardent Pines subsidiary. I have the revision history on the document Victor sent last night, which shows the cancellation clause was inserted at 11:14 p.m., after the version sent to Nikolai's assistant. I am telling you this so that no one in this room mistakes what happens next for a misunderstanding. The silence was long and cold. Stefan finally spoke, quietly, without looking at me. Celia, I didn't know about the last 2 rounds. I believe you, I said. That is somehow worse. He flinched. He did not argue. Nadia tried a different tactic that evening. She hosted an impromptu cocktail at her townhouse, and made certain the guest list included 2 journalists, a competitor hotelier, and the wife of a bank chairman we all did business with. I attended because Nikolai suggested I not stay away from rooms that were built specifically to exclude me. Nadia toasted the evening with a smile that did not touch her eyes. To Celia, who has apparently rediscovered ambition after all these years, better late than never, darling. I smiled back. To rediscovery. It's amazing what you find when you stop apologizing for taking up space. The competitor hotelier laughed, a genuine laugh, and Nadia's champagne flute trembled a fraction against her ring. One of the journalists leaned toward me a moment later and asked, in the tone of a woman who had spent her career recognizing quiet turning points, whether I would be available for an interview about the boutique hotel division. I told her I would be, once I had signed the paperwork that made me formally responsible for it. She smiled and nodded and did not write anything down, which was how I knew she had already written it down in her head. That was the moment I understood something Nikolai had said in the alcove 3 weeks earlier. The people who had spent years pretending I did not exist were more afraid of my visibility than of anything I might actually do. Being seen was, itself, the weapon. And I had spent so long treating visibility as a risk that I had forgotten it was also, occasionally, a form of armor. Nikolai found me on the terrace an hour later. He did not stand beside me at first. He stood a proper conversational distance away, hands in his pockets, watching the harbor lights. "You handled Nadia well," he said. "I didn't handle her. I just refused to shrink." "That is handling her, Celia. Most people do not know the difference." We were quiet for a moment. Then he said, without turning, "I need to say something, and I want you to hear it as a colleague first and anything else second. All right, you have every reason to want revenge. If you asked me tonight to remove Victor from every board he sits on, I would do it before breakfast. If you asked me to make Helena's life uncomfortable in ways she would feel for a decade, I would do that too. I am telling you this so you know the option is real, but I am also telling you I hope you do not ask, because I think you want something better than revenge, and I think you know what it is." I turned to look at him. The harbor lights caught the silver at his temples. "I want the company rebuilt honestly," I said. "I want my share restored to what it should have been. I want the suppliers I built relationships with brought back inside. I want Helena and Victor removed from any position where they can touch it again. And I want it done in daylight, on paper, with signatures, so nobody can ever say it was a favor." "That is not revenge," he said. "No, it's justice. Revenge is what you do when you cannot get justice." He nodded once slowly. "Then that is what we will do. One more thing," I added, and my voice was steadier than I expected. "When this is finished, and the company is clean, I am not stepping back. I built the brand. I know the suppliers by their first names and their children's names. I want to run the division. Not as a favor, as the person best qualified to do it. If you cannot offer me that, tell me now." He looked at me for a long, quiet moment. "Celia," he said, "I was going to ask you tomorrow. You are 3 sentences ahead of me, as usual." "Then stop being surprised by it," I said. And the smile that tugged at his mouth was the first genuine one I had seen him allow himself in weeks. He inclined his head, a small formal gesture, the way a man acknowledges a point conceded across a chessboard, and I understood then that we had crossed some invisible line neither of us was going to name aloud. What lay on the other side of it was not romance yet. It was something quieter and more consequential. It was recognition. It was the moment a person who had been standing beside you all your life finally turns and asks, without ceremony, whether you would like to be seen. 2 nights later, Victor made his final mistake. He and Helena filed an emergency board complaint alleging that I had authorized unbudgeted marketing spend on the boutique hotel division during my 2 weeks of consulting work with Nikolai's office. The amount was small, $28,000, but the allegation was framed as a fiduciary breach. If it stuck, it would disqualify me from any restored ownership on integrity grounds. It was clever. It was also panicked. I sat in our conference room at midnight with 3 loose-leaf binders open in front of me. Somewhere in the years after my divorce, I had developed a habit that had felt almost pathological at the time. I kept independent, dated copies of every professional communication I sent or received, indexed by month, printed on paper because paper does not update itself. Helena had once teased me for it. Stefan had called it my little archive. I had smiled and said nothing and kept doing it, because a woman who has been talked out of her own memory once will never let it happen twice. I opened January of the year after my divorce and began to work forward. By 4 a.m. I had it. Every single supplier reassignment, every share issuance notification that had never reached me, every board minute I had been excluded from, every meeting I had asked to attend and been told was purely procedural. My archive did not just defend me against the $28,000 allegation. It documented 6 years of coordinated exclusion in ink and date-stamped envelopes. I even found, in a folder I had labeled miscellaneous 3 years earlier, An email chain in which Victor and Helena discussed, in careful euphemism, how much longer they thought I would remain quiet. I brought it to Nikolai at 7. He read for an hour without speaking. When he finished, he closed the last binder and looked at me the way a man looks at something he has been trying to name for a long time. "Celia," he said, "you have been carrying this alone since you were 26 years old." I didn't know I was carrying it. I thought I was just being careful. You were being both. The board convened on a Thursday. Nikolai chaired. I sat on his right, my binders stacked in front of me, my hair in the loose waves I had worn to the gala. I wore the emerald dress again. It was, I had decided, my working uniform now. I walked the board through everything. Ardent Pines. The share issuances, the rerouted suppliers, the inserted clause, the panicked allegation and the midnight time-stamped invoices that disproved it, the euphemistic email chain, projected onto the wall in 24-point type so that no one at the long table could pretend not to read it. I spoke without raising my voice. I did not need to. The documents were louder than any voice in the room. When I finished, Nikolai spoke. Effective immediately, Victor D'Arcy is removed from every board and advisory role within the D'Arcy group of companies. Helena D'Arcy's advisory contracts are terminated. Ardent Pines is unwound, and its assets returned to Marlowe at D'Arcy Hospitality. Celia Marlowe's shareholding is restored to 12%, with retroactive dividend reconciliation. This is not a negotiation. It is a correction. Helena stood, spine rigid. Nikolai, you cannot side with an outsider against your own family. Nikolai stood as well. He was not a large man, but the room seemed to shrink around him. Celia is not an outsider. She was married to my brother for 4 years, and she built a company under our name. She is not family because you never let her be. That is a failure of yours, not hers. And I am not siding with her against family. I am siding with truth against theft. Victor tried to speak. Nikolai looked at him once, and Victor sat down. Stefan asked to see me alone that evening. We met in the small garden behind the estate, where we had once talked about children we never had. He was thinner than I remembered, or perhaps only smaller. I should have known, he said. I should have looked. Yes, I said. You should have. Is there anything I can do? Yes. Stay out of the operational side of the company. Take the passive dividends. Let me run the brand. That's what I need from you. He nodded. He did not argue. It was, perhaps, the most respectful thing he had ever done for me. As I walked back through the garden toward the drive, I realized that the ache I had carried for years about Stefan, the ache of a woman still hoping to be understood by a man who could not manage it, was simply gone. Not healed. Not resolved. Just gone, the way a fever leaves when it is finished with you. I had not needed his apology to be free of him. I had only needed to stop waiting for it. That, I thought, was the last small correction the last 7 years had required of me, and I had finally made it without noticing. Sometime between the emerald dress and the binders on the boardroom table, 6 months of rebuilding followed. I opened a new office on the 12th floor of the D'Arcy Tower. 3 floors below the boutique hospitality division I now ran directly. The desk was walnut, chosen by me. The chairs were leather, chosen by me. The paintings on the wall were by 3 women I had known since design school, chosen very deliberately by me. Nikolai and I met formally on Mondays and informally, over coffee, on Fridays. The formal meetings covered numbers. The informal meetings covered everything else. He told me about the succession restructure he had been working on for 2 years, about the 2 logistics acquisitions he was considering in Genoa, about the small volunteer legal clinic his mother had run in the 80s that he was quietly trying to revive. I told him about a new supplier in Lisbon who was making linens I would have killed for in my 20s, about the young designer I wanted to bring in as creative director, about the way it felt to sign a purchase order under my own name and have no one countersign it. We disagreed, sometimes seriously. He wanted to expand the division into corporate long-stay properties within a year. I told him the brand would not survive being stretched that thin, and I would rather grow more slowly and keep what we had. He argued. I argued back. He conceded, not because I was persistent, but because I was right. And he was the kind of man who could tell the difference. That, more than anything else in those 6 months, was what began to change the shape of the space between us. He had spent 30 years being deferred to. Being contradicted, cleanly and correctly, was apparently something he had been quietly starved of. One Friday, over coffee that had gone cold between us, he asked me why I had stopped painting. I had not known he knew I ever had. I told him I had stopped the year I got married, because Stefan had joked once, in front of his mother, that my studio smelled like turpentine and made the guest wing unusable. Nikolai listened, and when I finished, he said only, "He was wrong about a great many things. That was one of them." I did not paint that weekend, but I bought a small set of oils and set them on the shelf in my new office, unopened, so that they would be there when I was ready. He never mentioned them. He simply noticed, the next Friday, that they had appeared, and inclined his head a fraction, and said nothing at all. It was, I was learning, the way he said the most important things. Somewhere in the middle of month 4, I noticed I was choosing outfits for Friday mornings more carefully than for Monday mornings. Somewhere in month 5, Nikolai began to arrive 5 minutes early to our coffees, then 10. Neither of us said anything. Neither of us needed to. There was a language in the deliberate slowness of a man learning to trust his own hope, and I had spent enough years being unseen to recognize being seen when it happened. Nikolai asked me to dinner in month 6. Not at the estate, not at a family restaurant. A small place near the harbor where nobody knew either of us. He arrived first and stood when I entered. He had brought no flowers, which I appreciated. He knew I would have suspected them. "Celia," he said, "I want to be direct. Please. I have been in love with you for longer than I was allowed to admit to myself. I did not act on it because you were my brother's wife, and then because you were my brother's ex-wife and grieving, and then because I did not want to be another D'Arcy man who took something from you. I am telling you now because I think you deserve to know, and because if the answer is no, I want to know before I embarrass either of us at a board meeting." I looked at him for a long moment across the small table. 49 years old, silver at his temples, a small scar on his jawline from a business meeting in Marseille when he was 22, and the most honest sentence I had heard from a man in a decade. "The answer is not no," I said. "But I need something first, and I need to say it clearly so we don't ever confuse it later." "Say it." "I will not marry into your empire. I will not be a wife who signs where she is asked to sign. If we do this, we do it as equals in every room we share, business and otherwise. My share of the company stays mine. My name on the door stays mine. My voice at the table stays mine. Everything we build together, we build as partners, or we don't build it at all." He nodded slowly. "Understood." "That's it, Celia," he said. "I have spent 30 years running an empire because nobody else could. I have been looking for a partner since I was old enough to know I wanted one. I am not asking you to shrink. I am asking you to stand next to me and refuse to let me shrink either." I reached across the table and put my hand over his, and neither of us said anything else for a while. Outside the small restaurant, the harbor kept moving, ships arriving and departing under a sky that had, at some point in the last hour, gone from indigo to a soft, permanent black. When we finally rose to leave, he did not offer me his arm. He offered me his hand, palm up, the way an equal offers a hand to another equal. And I took it, and we walked out together into a night that felt, for the first time in years, entirely my own. The restructure was announced at the next annual gala, 1 year to the day after the night I had walked into the ballroom in emerald silk. The invitations went out under 2 names. Nikolai's office informed the family, in writing, that Marlowe & D'Arcy Hospitality would be spun into its own division of the D'Arcy Group, and that 50% of the division's equity, along with equal strategic authority across the wider hospitality vertical, would be held by Celia Marlowe. The remaining 50% would sit with the office of the chairman. Both signatures would be required on every material decision. There would be no chairman's override. There would be no tiebreaker clause. There would be, quite deliberately, no ladder for anyone to quietly climb behind me while I was not looking. Helena did not attend. Victor was not invited. Nadia sent a card of stiff congratulations because she had finally understood which way the wind blew. Stefan came quietly and shook my hand at the door and told me he was proud of me in the way a man says something he wishes he had earned the right to say years earlier. I thanked him and meant it, and then I let go of his hand and walked into the ballroom without looking back. I wore the emerald dress. Of course I did. I stepped into the ballroom on Nikolai's arm, and this time, the hush was not layered or strange. It was the hush of a room recognizing a fact rather than reacting to a surprise. The string quartet played on. The champagne stayed in the glasses, and Nikolai leaned in, close enough that only I could hear. "You're leaving with me tonight," he said quietly. "I know," I answered, "but this time it's my decision. And I'm bringing the Empire with me." He laughed, low and surprised and entirely for me, and I understood then that the woman in the mirror 1 year ago, the woman who had almost stayed hidden behind the powder room door, had made the only choice that mattered. She had refused, at last, to be small. Everything else, the company, the partnership, the man beside me, had followed from that single, quiet, unshakable refusal. I did not become visible because Nikolai saw me. I became visible because I finally decided to let myself be seen, and the Empire, and the man, and the life I had almost missed, had all been waiting on the other side of that door,